Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1: The Unexpected Stop. The afternoon sun hung low over the winding lanes of the English countryside, casting long, golden shadows across fields and hedgerows. Hercule Poirot was driving along one such lane, his sleek car humming with steady rhythm, when a sudden judder and a soft, metallic groan beneath the bonnet caused him to halt. The machine had faltered, and Poirot, ever the meticulous observer, quickly diagnosed that the radiator had sprung a leak. A sigh of mild annoyance escaped him. "Ah, mon Dieu, even the most dependable of engines can betray one at the most inconvenient of moments," he murmured, tapping the steering wheel thoughtfully. Ahead, a small sign creaked in the wind: Willow Road Inn, lodging and refreshments. A modest building with ivy crawling up its stone walls appeared through the soft haze of mist rising from the fields. The inn, perched on the side of the narrow road, looked as if it had existed there for centuries, weathered yet sturdy, holding some secret of the past within its walls. Poirot's instincts, honed over years of observing human behavior and mechanical detail alike, told him that a stay here, though unplanned, might prove interesting. As he drew the car to the gravel driveway, the inn's proprietor hurried out to meet him, a flustered figure in a worn apron and a slightly crooked bowler hat. "Sir, welcome to the Willow Road Inn. We don't get many visitors these days. You're welcome to park here, of course, though I'm afraid we're a bit limited in space." Poirot gave a small, polite smile, stepping from his car with his usual elegance. "Merci, monsieur. A place to rest and repair one's carriage is most welcome. I trust one may also dine, n'est-ce pas?" His French accent carried the lightest trace of amusement, for he enjoyed observing people's reactions when he spoke. The innkeeper, Mr. Hargreaves, nodded hastily. "Of course, sir. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, all can be arranged. Though I warn you, we have but a few rooms, and the weather today, well, it keeps most travellers away." Poirot's eyes, sharp as ever, took in the inn's interior the moment he stepped inside. The reception area was modest but impeccably clean. A small hearth sat in the corner, unlit, though the scent of polished wood and faint traces of wax from the floorboard suggested fastidious care. A grandfather clock ticked steadily, almost deliberately, in the background, marking the passage of each quiet second. "Now, monsieur," Hargreaves said, leading Poirot to the guest rooms, "I have a room on the first floor. The view is pleasant, though I warn you, we do not have electricity in all corners. Candles are provided." Poirot inclined his head. "Très bien. One does not require excessive lighting to observe the human soul, n'est-ce pas?" He moved gracefully up the narrow staircase, his eyes noting each detail: the slight unevenness in the steps, the polished brass handles on the doors, the faint impression of someone having recently dusted the furniture. Everything spoke of care, but Poirot sensed the presence of nerves beneath the surface. Once settled in his room, a modest chamber with a sturdy bed, a writing desk, and a small washstand, Poirot opened the window. The landscape was quiet, a thin mist curling around the hedgerows, and beyond, the low hum of a distant river. There was an air of isolation here, which Poirot always found interesting. Isolated, yet full of possibility, he mused aloud. Yes, this is exactly the kind of place where human nature reveals its small, subtle intricacies. Descending to the common room, Poirot found that the few other guests were already gathered. An elderly gentleman, cane in hand, studied the morning paper with a furrowed brow. His expression suggested worry, though he tried to mask it with a veneer of dignity. A young man in a dark suit tapped impatiently on the leg of his chair, his eyes darting toward the door every few moments as though waiting for someone, or perhaps watching everyone. And finally, a woman of striking presence, draped elegantly in a pale blue dress with a delicate lace collar, was arranging her tea with a precision that betrayed both composure and tension. Poirot observed them quietly, taking in small details. The elderly gentleman, he noted, wore a ring that glinted gold against his wrinkled hands, suggesting wealth. The young man's shoes were polished to perfection, though a faint scuff on the heel betrayed recent travel on muddy roads. And the lady's gloves were immaculately clean, yet there was a faint smudge on the left fingertip, a mark Poirot's trained eyes would not miss. Each detail, insignificant to most, was a thread in the intricate tapestry of human behavior. Hargreaves bustled about nervously, offering tea and light fare. Poirot accepted politely, sitting near the hearth, where the soft light illuminated the subtle expressions of each guest. "Ah," he said softly to himself, "so many small secrets, so many hidden stories." He observed how the young man shifted in his chair when he thought no one was looking, how the lady's eyes briefly flicked toward the door, and how the elderly gentleman's hands trembled ever so slightly when lifting his cup. The room held a quiet tension, an invisible current running through it, like the stillness before a storm. Poirot's mind worked swiftly, cataloguing each observation, mannerisms, posture, expressions, and even the tone of their murmured greetings to one another. "Yes," he thought, "this inn is far from ordinary, though it appears modest. The human heart is like a book, and one must read between the lines, n'est-ce pas?" Later, as evening drew close, Poirot wandered the inn's small library, a cozy room lined with shelves of old books, each carefully dusted and aligned. He noticed several volumes on law, psychology, and travel, subjects reflecting curiosity and caution, perhaps indicative of prior guests, or perhaps placed there for reasons of subtle influence. He opened a window to the garden, where the faint scent of rain-damp earth mingled with the aroma of pine from the surrounding woods. It was quiet here, almost too quiet. As Poirot returned to his room to pen a few notes, a sudden knock at the door startled him slightly. "Ah, no mystery is ever complete without a touch of the unexpected," he murmured with a faint smile. Opening the door, he found Mr. Hargreaves, holding a small note. "For you, monsieur," said the innkeeper, his voice tinged with unease. Poirot took the note, noting the hurried script, and opened it carefully. The message was brief, almost cryptic. "Beware the quiet ones, the shadows hold more than they seem. A friend." Poirot read the words twice, his small grey eyes narrowing with interest. "Ah," he said quietly, setting the note on his desk, "even in a simple roadside inn, the human heart has stories waiting to be discovered. One must always observe, always anticipate, and sometimes, the most ordinary of places holds the most extraordinary of secrets." With that, he prepared for bed, his mind already piecing together the small, subtle hints he had observed in the past few hours. Little did he know that the night at the Willow Road Inn would unveil events most disturbing, events that would call for all his famous little grey cells and the methodical brilliance for which Hercule Poirot was renowned. And so, in the quiet of the English countryside, beneath the fading light of a wintry afternoon, the stage was set. The Willow Road Inn, humble yet enigmatic, awaited the unfolding of a mystery that would test the limits of observation, deduction, and the understanding of the human soul itself. Chapter 2: A Shocking Discovery. The morning arrived with a damp chill that seeped through the walls of the Willow Road Inn. A fine drizzle tapped against the window panes, and the road outside gleamed darkly under the weak winter sun. Hercule Poirot, ever alert to the subtlest impressions, was already awake, seated at the small writing desk in his room, reviewing his observations from the previous evening. The cryptic note left at his door had piqued his curiosity. "Beware the quiet ones, the shadows hold more than they seem." As he sipped his carefully prepared cup of tea, the gentle rustling of the inn's morning routine reached his ears, the creak of the stairs, the distant clatter of breakfast being set, and the soft murmur of voices. Poirot's keen eyes, trained to notice the slightest irregularity, detected a tension among the guests even at this early hour. Their movements were measured, almost cautious, as if each step might reveal something they wished to conceal. He dressed with precision, adjusting his cravat and ensuring his shoes were perfectly polished. Even in the most ordinary of places, appearances mattered, not merely for etiquette but for the subtle insight they could provide into a person's character. With his hat perched at the correct angle, he descended the narrow staircase to the common room, expecting an uneventful breakfast. It was then that the first scream shattered the calm. The sound, piercing and urgent, came from the corridor leading to the guest rooms. Poirot's head turned sharply, his grey eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. Mr. Hargreaves appeared in the doorway, wide-eyed and flustered, while the guests rushed from their own rooms in varying states of alarm. Without hesitation, Poirot moved toward the source of the scream, his mind already cataloguing possible explanations. At the end of the corridor lay the figure of the elderly gentleman, Mr. Aldridge, sprawled across the polished floor. A glint of silver protruded from his chest, an ornate letter opener, its handle carved in delicate patterns, had become an instrument of fatal violence. The room itself was undisturbed, the window was shut, the door closed from the inside. Nothing suggested a forced entry, nothing screamed of struggle beyond the final, fatal moment. Poirot's eyes swept the scene with methodical precision. "Notice, Hastings," he said quietly, for Dr. John Hastings had accompanied him, though unaware until now, that there is no sign of intrusion. This suggests the victim knew his assailant. Observe the angle of the letter opener, the way the body lies, it is almost deliberate, calculated. Yes, very calculated indeed. The guests, still pale and trembling, clustered near the doorway. Madame Larocque, her pale face framed by the delicate lace of her collar, seemed to shrink inward, while Philip Donnell shifted nervously from foot to foot. Mr. Hargreaves, the innkeeper, mumbled assurances and excuses, clearly struggling to maintain composure. Inspector Redding, a young constable from the nearest town, arrived within minutes, summoned by the panicked cries of Hargreaves. Poirot greeted him politely, his manner calm yet commanding, and immediately took in the inspector's demeanor, eager, competent in procedure, but lacking the subtle understanding of human behavior that Poirot prized above all. "Inspector," Poirot began, "I believe it will be prudent to examine the room quietly, without disturbing anything. Every detail here is significant. The placement of the body, the position of the furniture, the slightest smudge or mark, all these speak volumes." Redding nodded, though his gaze flicked nervously toward the guests. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. But, do you think the killer could still be here?" Poirot's small grey eyes gleamed. "Mais oui, it is possible. That is why we must observe with utmost care. The murderer is often less obvious than the shadow behind him. Now, let us examine the scene." Poirot crouched beside the body, noting the precise alignment of the letter opener, the way Mr. Aldridge's fingers had curled involuntarily, and the absence of defensive wounds. "See, Hastings, he did not struggle, which confirms my suspicion. He knew the attacker. Yet there is an elegance, almost a cruelty, in the way this has been executed. Observe the neatness. No panic. The murderer is meticulous." He then turned his attention to the room itself. The window latch bore no marks, and the curtains were drawn back evenly. A small writing desk stood neatly against the far wall, drawers slightly ajar as if someone had hastily searched them but disturbed nothing of real value. A chair was pushed back, its legs undisturbed on the polished floor. Poirot's keen mind catalogued every detail, the angle of shadows, the faint indentation on the carpet where Mr. Aldridge's cane had rested, the tiny smear of dust on the brass handle that suggested recent movement. "Notice, Hastings," Poirot whispered, "that even the smallest detail is a clue. The murderer, in his haste or arrogance, leaves these whispers behind. We must listen." Poirot then addressed the guests, who had gathered hesitantly near the doorway. "Miss Amos, I regret to inform you that we are faced with a very serious matter. Mr. Aldridge has been murdered. This was no accident. Each of you, in some way, may hold information that will help us understand what occurred. Therefore, I ask for your patience and your truthfulness. Even the smallest lie may mislead us. Madame Larocque's lips trembled slightly. I did not see anything, she murmured. I was still in my room. Her voice, though soft, held the faintest hesitation, a tremor Poirot noted immediately. Philip Donnell, by contrast, fidgeted and avoided Poirot's gaze. I was reading in the library, he said quickly. I heard nothing unusual. His shoes, Poirot observed, were damp at the soles despite his claim of being indoors, a detail that registered quietly in the detective's mind. Hargreaves, meanwhile, wrung his hands and repeated over and over, I swear, sir, I was busy in the kitchen. I did not leave my duties. Poirot simply inclined his head and allowed him to speak, while noting the faint stain on his apron that seemed incongruous with kitchen work. As the constable began to take statements, Poirot quietly withdrew to a corner of the room. He ran his fingers lightly over the carpet, inspected the angles of the furniture once more, and considered the psychological landscape. It is never the object alone that reveals the crime, he muttered softly. It is the mind behind it, the fear, the pride, the vanity, the desperation. We must read the heart as much as the room. Hours passed in meticulous observation. Poirot examined Mr. Aldridge's personal belongings, noting the careful arrangement of his writing materials, the untouched books, and the recent letters unopened and neatly stacked. He discovered, with barely a glance, that a small leather-bound notebook had been removed, a detail that suggested planning and intent. Someone had taken it before or after the murder, and this was likely the key to motive. By late morning, the initial shock had settled into a tense unease. The guests retreated to their rooms, whispers carried down the corridor, and the inn itself seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the revelation that Poirot alone could discern. Standing beside the window, looking out at the rain-slicked road, Poirot allowed himself a faint smile. Ah, Hastings, he said, we have entered a labyrinth. Each person, each detail, each movement is a thread. Soon we shall see who wove this deadly pattern, and who will be ensnared by their own duplicity. And so, in the quiet of the rainy morning, the Willow Road Inn became not merely a place of lodging, but the stage for a drama of human greed, fear, and hidden secrets, a drama that Hercule Poirot was uniquely equipped to unravel. The storm outside was nothing compared to the turbulence that now simmered within these walls, and the detective's famed little grey cells were already at work, untangling the threads of a mystery that promised to be as intricate as it was deadly. Chapter 3: The Web of Alibis. The morning after Mr. Aldridge's death was thick with mist, which clung stubbornly to the hedgerows and fields surrounding the Willow Road Inn. Hercule Poirot sat at the small writing desk in his room, meticulously reviewing his notes from the previous day. Every glance, every movement, every minute detail had been catalogued with the precision that was his hallmark. The murder was not merely a violent act, it was a puzzle of human behavior, each thread revealing something of the perpetrator. Poirot's breakfast was a quiet affair, the room dimly lit by the soft morning light filtering through the small window. Hastings, ever loyal and eager to assist, attempted small talk. Do you really think we'll get anywhere, Poirot? Everyone claims they know nothing. Poirot shook his head, his small grey eyes sparkling with amusement. Ah, Hastings, it is precisely when they claim to know nothing that the truth is most near. The human mind is a garden, and when one is nervous or afraid, one tends to leave small footprints. We must find them. By mid-morning, Poirot descended to the common room. The surviving guests were gathered there, their faces drawn and pale from a night of troubled sleep. The inn itself seemed quieter than usual, as if even the building held its breath in anticipation. Poirot's mind, ever alert to the subtlest nuances, noted each detail, Madame Larocque's hands fidgeting with her lace handkerchief, Philip Donnell's restless tapping on the chair leg, and Hargreaves' nervously wringing hands. It is time to understand who was where and when, Poirot said calmly. We must weave together the alibis, for in their structure will lie truth or deception. He began with Madame Larocque. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea, but she maintained a composed manner. Madam, Poirot said, where were you at the moment you first heard the scream? I was still in my room, reading, she replied, her voice soft yet tinged with uncertainty. I did not hear anything until I came down. I swear it, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot observed closely. The faint smudge on her left fingertip, which he had noticed the previous day, returned to his attention. Ah, yes, you read quietly, yes, but perhaps you went to the window first. Or perhaps, something disturbed you, Madame Larocque's eyes widened slightly, and she shifted uncomfortably. Poirot's smile was gentle but knowing. He would return to this subtle clue later. Philip Donnell was next. His alibi, he insisted, was solid. He had been in the library preparing for a business call. Yet Poirot's trained eye noticed inconsistencies immediately. Philip's shoes, which had appeared polished the previous evening, bore faint traces of mud. Ah, monsieur, Poirot said softly, it seems the library was very far from the source of mud you now carry. A walk outdoors, perhaps. Philip's face flushed, and he stammered an explanation about having stepped outside briefly. Poirot made a discreet note. The young man's nervousness and minor deception suggested he was hiding something, though not necessarily the murder itself. Poirot then turned to Hargreaves, the innkeeper. Monsieur, he began, you claim to have been busy in the kitchen. And yet, Poirot pointed casually to the faint stain on the apron Hargreaves wore. This mark, it does not appear as if it came from ordinary cooking. It is faint but irregular. Might I ask what it is? Hargreaves' eyes darted nervously, and he swallowed hard. I don't know, sir. Perhaps from carrying wood for the fire? I did. I was everywhere, you see? Poirot's small lips pressed together in thought. Ah, yes. Everywhere. Very convenient, none. As Poirot spoke to each guest, a pattern began to emerge. Everyone's alibi contained elements of truth, interwoven with subtle inconsistencies. He noticed Madame Larocque's restless glances toward the hallway leading to Mr. Aldridge's room, Philip's attempts to appear casual while covering his shoes, and even Hargreaves' slightly defensive tone when discussing mundane tasks. Each person's behavior created a web of half-truths, and Poirot's mind, like a careful weaver, began to trace each thread. Poirot next examined the room where the murder had taken place once more, with Inspector Redding in tow. The young officer had begun to catalogue evidence mechanically, but Poirot's method was psychological as much as physical. He noted the precise placement of the letter opener, the way Mr. Aldridge's body had been carefully arranged, and the untouched belongings on the desk. Observe, Inspector, Poirot said, that no sign of struggle exists. This is deliberate, OUI? Our murderer is not merely violent, he is meticulous, careful, calculating. He wished to create the impression of accident or sudden attack. Yet these small details, Poirot gestured to the faint impressions on the floor, the subtle dust smudges, these betray him. Human nature cannot be entirely concealed. He then examined the belongings Mr. Aldridge had left behind. A ledger lay on the desk, open to a page filled with financial notes and names. Poirot's fingers lightly traced the entries, noting that one particular name had been hastily erased. Ah, Hastings, do you see? Someone wished to hide a connection. Perhaps the motive lies here. Yes, the inheritance, the distribution of wealth, the old human desire for advantage. These matters often lead to tragedy. The investigation then moved to the inn's other rooms. Poirot and Hastings quietly interviewed staff, noting that some seemed unusually hesitant to offer information. One maid, speaking softly, mentioned seeing a shadow near Mr. Aldridge's door late the previous night, though she could not identify who it was. Another servant noticed Madame Larocque lingering in the hallway at an odd hour. Each observation, seemingly minor, added complexity to the web of alibis. Poirot, as always, remained calm and patient. He knew the importance of subtlety. "Hastings," he said, "the key to understanding a crime is not to rush to accuse but to observe, to allow the threads of human behavior to reveal themselves. Lies are like thin threads, they break when stretched too far. And yet, even in deception, clues are left, always clues." By late afternoon, Poirot had compiled a detailed mental map of movements, timings, and motivations. Each guest had an alibi that could, with careful inspection, be partially verified, yet all alibis contained small, telling discrepancies. Poirot reviewed them quietly. Madame Larocque claimed to be in her room, yet traces suggested she had been near Mr. Aldridge's door. Philip Donnell stated he remained in the library, yet mud on his shoes contradicted his claim. Hargreaves professed to be occupied with kitchen duties, yet apron stain and nervous behavior suggested he had been elsewhere. Poirot leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The web of alibis is intricate, yes, but not impenetrable. Each lie, each half-truth, is a window into the human mind. And it is the mind we must read, Hastings, more than the objects, more than the blood and the steel. As evening approached, the mist thickened outside the inn, cloaking the road in soft, impenetrable grey. The guests, sensing the subtle scrutiny of Poirot's eyes, retreated into their rooms, whispers carrying down the corridors. Poirot remained in the common room, moving from observation to reflection. His little grey cells worked tirelessly, piecing together a complex pattern. Yes, he murmured to himself, each guest has secrets. Each has opportunity. And yet, the true culprit is revealed not by panic or haste, but by the subtle language of behavior, the quiet inconsistencies that only the trained eye may discern. In the stillness of the Willow Road Inn, Poirot's mind traced the threads of human behavior, intertwining motive and opportunity, uncovering lies carefully woven to protect the guilty. The alibis, though outwardly plausible, were fragile. Soon, he knew, the pattern would become clear. The murderer had left a signature, hidden in plain sight, and Poirot's genius would unravel it. And so, as the night began to descend once more over the misty countryside, the web of alibis remained tangled, but the detective's methodical mind was already beginning to disentangle it. The Willow Road Inn, tranquil in appearance, was now the stage for a psychological drama, one that demanded patience, observation, and the unparalleled insight of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 4: Hidden Secrets. The morning at the Willow Road Inn broke with a thin veil of sunlight piercing the persistent mist. The rain of the previous day had left the hedgerows slick, the gravel pathways shimmering with moisture. Hercule Poirot, ever alert to subtle signs, had already begun his observations before breakfast. While Hastings fussed over a cup of tea, Poirot quietly examined the small library, noting details that to most would seem trivial: the faint indentation in the shelf where a book had been removed, the subtle dust marks indicating hurried movements, and the way the morning light revealed the tiniest scratches on the polished wood floor. "It is in these minute details, Hastings," Poirot said softly, "that the truth whispers. One must listen carefully. A careless gesture, a hurried movement, a shadow left in haste, these are the language of human secrets." After breakfast, Poirot sought a private moment to inspect Mr. Aldridge's belongings more thoroughly. He requested Hargreaves to show him the deceased gentleman's luggage, which had been set aside in a quiet corner of the inn. The innkeeper's hands trembled slightly as he opened the leather suitcase, and Poirot noted it with interest. Inside, the contents were meticulously arranged, clothes folded with military-like precision, toiletries neatly stowed, and personal papers stacked with care. Yet Poirot's practiced eyes detected one anomaly: a small, leather-bound notebook was missing. Only a loose bundle of correspondence remained. He carefully examined the letters, noting postmarks, handwriting, and peculiar folds. One letter in particular caught his attention. It bore the seal of a distant solicitor in London and appeared recently delivered. The envelope had been slit open with precision, and the paper inside contained details of a recent amendment to Mr. Aldridge's will. Poirot's fingers traced the lines of the document with a faint smile. The motive, Hastings, is often closer than we imagine. The human heart is moved by money, by pride, by revenge. The alteration of a will, this is the kind of thing that can inspire acts both desperate and deadly. He continued his inspection, lifting the underside of the writing desk. There, he found a small, shallow drawer, slightly ajar, which contained a few receipts, a pair of gloves, and a fountain pen. Not a trace of the missing notebook, yet the drawer bore faint scratches, as if something had been removed hastily. Poirot's mind raced through possibilities. The notebook had either been taken by the murderer or by someone else with a clandestine interest in Mr. Aldridge's affairs. Poirot then summoned the guests individually under the pretext of casual conversation. Madame Larocque, the elegant widow, spoke softly, her voice betraying faint tension. "Monsieur Poirot?" "I do not know why I feel so anxious," she admitted, her gloved hands twisting. "I cannot help but think of events in the past. Things that should have remained hidden." Poirot leaned forward, his small eyes fixed upon her. Madam, you speak of secrets. Secrets have a habit of emerging when least expected. Tell me, were you acquainted with Mr. Aldridge before your stay at the inn?" "Yes, some years ago. We were distant acquaintances. I had heard of his family matters, of disputes regarding inheritance. I confess, I had reason to be concerned. But I swear I would never harm him." Her eyes were clear, her tone honest, yet the careful phrasing suggested more than a casual interest. Poirot made a note in his mind. Madame Larocque's connection to Aldridge, though polite, was not insignificant. Philip Donnell was next. He hesitated, clearing his throat. "I had no personal connection. Merely business dealings. I knew he had money, and, well, I was curious about potential investments." His casual phrasing and rapid speech seemed rehearsed. Poirot observed the subtle twitch of his jaw and the way his gaze flickered toward the window as though expecting someone to appear. Another thread to follow. Poirot's attention then returned to the innkeeper. Hargreaves had been polite but tense all morning. "Monsieur," Poirot said softly, "you have lived here for many years. You know every guest, every habit. Tell me, have you observed anything unusual in Mr. Aldridge's behavior since his arrival?" The innkeeper hesitated, eyes flicking toward the corridor as if afraid of being overheard. He was secretive, Monsieur Poirot. Always writing, always speaking in whispers over the telephone. And last night, I thought I saw someone lingering near his room, though I cannot say who it was." Poirot inclined his head, absorbing the detail. You saw, yet you could not identify. Very well. The human mind will often notice things that are not immediately clear. This is precisely why we must be vigilant. Later, Poirot requested to inspect the corridor outside Mr. Aldridge's room. The floorboards creaked faintly under his weight, and he noticed subtle scuff marks leading toward the stairwell. They were slight but consistent with hurried footsteps. Additionally, a small streak of dirt traced along the edge of the wall, almost invisible, suggesting someone had brushed against it during movement. Poirot's mind catalogued it quietly. The murderer had been careful, yet no one is perfect. Returning to the common room, Poirot reviewed all details with Hastings. "Hastings, observe. The missing notebook, the faint scratches in the drawer, the altered will, and the nervous glances of our guests, all these are signs pointing to hidden motives. Our murderer did not act at random. he or she had reason, opportunity, and the subtle arrogance of thinking they would escape detection. Poirot then considered the psychology of the guests. Madame Larocque, outwardly calm and elegant, exhibited tiny signs of internal tension. Philip Donnell, youthful and restless, had an impulsiveness that could lead to carelessness. And Hargreaves, the innkeeper, possessed the unique advantage of intimate knowledge of the building and its routines. Each possibility must be weighed, yet none could be dismissed prematurely. The afternoon brought further revelations. A small maid, timid and hesitant, approached Poirot quietly. She handed him a folded slip of paper which she claimed to have found slipped under a door overnight. The message was brief, written in a hurried hand. Not all is as it seems. Watch the quietest ones, they carry the heaviest secrets. Poirot's small smile widened slightly. Ah, Hastings, see? The threads are multiplying. Someone seeks to warn us, or perhaps to mislead. In such matters, the line between truth and deception is often thin, yes, very thin. Poirot spent the remainder of the day retracing steps, observing the subtle interplay of human behavior and environment. The faint scratches, the careful placement of objects, the nervous gestures, all hinted at careful planning. The murderer had sought to conceal his or her intent, yet, in human nature, no deception is perfect. Every lie carries a trace, every calculated act leaves a whisper. As evening descended over the misty landscape, Poirot stood by the window, gazing at the grey fields beyond. The secrets of the human heart, he murmured, are hidden in the ordinary gestures, the small inconsistencies, the moments of hesitation. Our murderer has left such traces. Soon, Hastings, soon we shall follow them to the truth. And so, within the quiet walls of the Willow Road Inn, the drama continued. Hidden motives, subtle clues, and the delicate interplay of human psychology intertwined like threads in a tapestry, waiting for the brilliance of Hercule Poirot's mind to unravel them. Tonight, as the wind whispered through the trees outside, the inn seemed almost alive with anticipation, and Poirot, serene and methodical, prepared to probe even deeper into the hidden secrets of those within. Chapter 5: A Stranger's Arrival. The Willow Road Inn lay under a pall of late afternoon gloom, the mist outside thickening and weaving around the ivy-clad walls. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, even for a place accustomed to solitude. Guests moved with caution, whispering in corners, their earlier composure now eroded by the gravity of the murder and Poirot's unrelenting scrutiny. Hercule Poirot sat near the hearth, quietly reviewing his observations. Each minute detail of the previous days had been catalogued in his mind, the missing notebook, the faint mud on Philip Donnell's shoes, Madame Larocque's subtle distress, and the innkeeper Hargreaves' inexplicable apron stain. All hinted at hidden motives, but the murderer remained elusive, cunningly concealed behind layers of ordinary behavior. Hastings, peering out the window at the descending dusk, murmured, "I cannot help feeling that someone is watching us, Poirot. There is an air of something more lurking in the shadows." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, Hastings, you have the instinct of fear, which is often the first whisper of truth. Yet one must not let fear dictate observation. Patience and reasoning, these are our allies." It was at that moment the inn's door opened with a sudden, brisk movement. A man stepped into the dim hallway, shaking off the wet from his coat. Poirot's sharp eyes immediately assessed him, tall, with a neatly trimmed moustache, a polished hat, and a dark overcoat. But there was a theatrical quality to his carriage, an almost exaggerated self-assurance. The stranger approached the counter where Hargreaves stood, speaking rapidly in clipped tones. "I am Inspector Faulkner, from Scotland Yard," he announced, displaying a shiny badge with a flourish. "I've come regarding the unfortunate death of Mr. Aldridge." Poirot's small, grey eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Ah, Scotland Yard, yes. A fine institution. Inspector, may I inquire when you were dispatched and under whose authority?" His tone was polite but measured, as always. Faulkner's response was vague, emphasizing his swift arrival and the urgency of his investigation. Yet Poirot noticed the small details that betrayed subtle deception. The badge was slightly tarnished, the uniform immaculate but stiff, the manner overly formal, almost rehearsed. There was something in the man's bearing that spoke of careful performance rather than genuine authority. "I shall observe," Poirot murmured to Hastings. "Watch closely, mon ami. Sometimes the most dangerous person is the one pretending to enforce order." The stranger began interviewing the guests in a brisk, commanding manner. Madame Larocque's composure faltered under his questions, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Philip Donnell's eyes darted toward the hallway as if fearing interruption, and Hargreaves became increasingly flustered, dropping a tea tray in his haste to accommodate the inspector's demands. Poirot observed quietly, noting every glance, every hesitancy, every subtle sign of deceit. Faulkner's methods were conventional, questions posed rapidly, statements recorded without pause, a reliance on authority to extract truth. Poirot's mind, however, worked differently. He knew that truth is rarely spoken aloud, it is often betrayed in tiny gestures, subtle contradictions, and the delicate rhythm of human behavior. When the stranger approached Poirot directly, the detective offered a courteous nod. "Monsieur Poirot, I understand you have been investigating," Faulkner said, attempting to sound authoritative. "I am certain you have noted details that will assist in my official inquiry." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Ah, yes, Inspector. One observes carefully. Yet one must also distinguish between those who speak with honesty and those who embellish. And speaking of embellishment, I have noticed certain peculiarities about your arrival. Your methods are unusual, non? Very theatrical." Faulkner's brow furrowed slightly, though he retained his composure. "I assure you, monsieur, my methods are entirely legitimate." Poirot smiled faintly. "Of course, Inspector. Legitimacy is a matter of perception. And perception is often manipulated." He stepped aside, allowing Faulkner to continue, but his keen eyes followed the man like a hawk, noting the quick, deliberate movements, the way he examined the room with a calculated glance, and the slight hesitation when he asked the guests about their movements. Poirot's instincts whispered that this man was no ordinary inspector, he was an intruder, a performer, perhaps even a pawn in a larger scheme. As the evening progressed, Poirot observed Faulkner moving toward Madame Larocque's room, ostensibly to take her statement privately. Poirot's curiosity was piqued. "Hastings," he whispered, "watch closely. The human mind tends to reveal its true colors when it believes itself unobserved." Following quietly at a distance, Poirot noted Faulkner's approach to the door, the careful checking of the corridor, and the slight pause before knocking. The inspector's hand trembled ever so slightly, a minor detail, but one that did not escape Poirot's attention. The subtle nervousness suggested that Faulkner's confidence might be a mask. Poirot returned to the common room, where Hastings had remained, and quietly reviewed the day's observations. He began connecting threads, the missing notebook, the mysterious letter, the careful yet flawed alibis of the guests, and now the arrival of a suspicious inspector. The plot seemed to thicken, and Poirot's mind worked tirelessly to discern which threads were genuine clues and which were deliberate misdirections. Shortly thereafter, a minor incident occurred. A small key, which Hargreaves swore had been on the counter, was found under a chair in the common room. Faulkner claimed to have discovered it during his inspection, but Poirot noted the subtle angle of the chair and the disturbed dust on the floor. The key had clearly been placed deliberately, either to implicate someone or to distract from the true trail. The layers of deception were multiplying. Poirot requested that the guests gather for a brief meeting in the parlor, insisting politely on their presence. "Miss Amis," he said, his voice calm and precise, "we are in a delicate situation. There are truths yet undiscovered, and mysteries laid upon mysteries. The arrival of Inspector Faulkner is intriguing. Yet it is our duty to observe, to listen, and to distinguish between the threads of reality and the threads of illusion. The guests exchanged glances, a mixture of unease and curiosity, while Poirot's keen mind catalogued every nuance, the subtle tension in Madame Larocque's posture, Philip Donnell's nervous leg-tapping, and even Hargreaves' almost imperceptible sweating. All signs pointed toward hidden motives, carefully veiled intentions, and the possibility that someone was orchestrating events behind the scenes. As night fell, the inn seemed to close in around them. Shadows stretched along the corridor, dancing with the flicker of candlelight. Poirot, sitting near the hearth, reflected on the day's revelations. The arrival of the stranger had altered the dynamics within the inn. Where previously the guests had been tense and wary of each other, they now carried an additional layer of caution, the awareness that an outside observer had entered their midst. Yet Poirot suspected that this stranger was not merely an observer. He might be a pawn, or worse. Deliberate distraction designed to confuse the investigation and mask the true intentions of the murderer. "Ah, Hastings," Poirot whispered, "observe how human nature adapts to perceived authority. People alter their behavior in the presence of a figure of power, revealing or concealing truths according to their fears. It is in these moments, when the mind is constrained, that the genuine character is exposed." By the end of the evening, Poirot had drawn several conclusions. Faulkner's arrival was no coincidence, the key found under the chair suggested deliberate misdirection, and the guest's behavior had shifted subtly but noticeably in response to the stranger's presence. The detective's little grey cells worked tirelessly, piecing together the expanding tapestry of secrets, lies, and motives that now stretched through the inn like an invisible web. And so, in the shadowed corridors of the Willow Road Inn, with the mist curling around its ancient walls and the wind whispering against the panes, a new element had entered the unfolding drama. The murder of Mr. Aldridge was no longer merely a question of motive and opportunity. It had become a test of perception, a study in the art of deception, and a challenge for the incomparable mind of Hercule Poirot. The puzzle had grown in complexity, but Poirot remained serene. In his calm, methodical manner, he was already tracing the threads that would, in time, lead to the revelation of the truth. Chapter 6: Red Herrings and Misleads. The morning at Willow Road Inn dawned grey and mist-laden, with a damp chill that seemed to seep into every corner of the ancient building. Hercule Poirot sat at the small writing desk in the common room, sipping a carefully prepared cup of tea while studying his meticulously compiled notes. The arrival of Inspector Faulkner had introduced a new variable into the already tangled situation, and Poirot's mind worked tirelessly to distinguish genuine clues from deliberate misdirection. Hastings, who had been observing the other guests with growing unease, leaned forward. "I still cannot shake the feeling that this Faulkner fellow isn't what he claims, Poirot. He behaves like a visitor trying to see everything without truly investigating." Poirot nodded, his small grey eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Ah, Hastings, intuition is valuable, yes, but one must always confirm with observation. Every act, every gesture, every word contains a trace of the mind behind it. And sometimes, the most innocuous detail is the key to the puzzle." Their discussion was interrupted by a sudden knock at the inn's door. Mr. Hargreaves, flustered as usual, announced the arrival of a messenger with a telegram. Poirot took the small envelope with his usual meticulous care and unfolded it. The message, brief and urgent, read: "Danger approaches from within. Trust not the stranger. A friend." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "A friend, Poirot? How mysterious. And yet, what does it truly mean?" Poirot's small smile was tinged with amusement. "Ah, Hastings, mystery itself is often cloaked in vagueness. But observe, the message warns of danger within. Someone here, it seems, fears that the murderer may not yet have completed his work." "And the reference to the stranger?" The arrival of Inspector Faulkner must be reconsidered carefully." Poirot decided to retrace his steps, visiting each guest once more. He began with Madame Larocque, whose nervous disposition had already attracted his attention. "Madam," he said gently, "yesterday, you mentioned secrets from the past. Are these personal, or do they relate to Mr. Aldridge?" Madame Larocque paused, her gloved fingers twisting. "Monsieur Poirot, it is difficult. I had heard whispers regarding Mr. Aldridge's family, his wealth, and disputes over inheritance. I feared that someone close to him might act recklessly." Poirot nodded, considering the phrasing. "Ah, you feared action, yet you speak only of whispers. It is often what one fears but does not witness that drives behavior." "Merci, madame." His eyes lingered on her hands, the slight tremor betraying an anxiety beyond the words. Next, he visited Philip Donnell. The young man appeared outwardly composed, though a subtle tension in his posture betrayed unease. "Monsieur Donnell," Poirot began, "yesterday you stated that you had remained in the library, yet the traces on your shoes suggested otherwise. Can you clarify this for me?" Philip's cheeks reddened. I went outside briefly, yes. To clear my head. I swear I had nothing to do with the murder." His voice cracked slightly, a detail Poirot noted silently. "Curiosity sometimes leads one astray," Poirot murmured. "Merci for your honesty. It is small truths, yes, that build the larger picture." Poirot then turned his attention to Hargreaves. The innkeeper appeared increasingly flustered, his apron already streaked from an earlier spill. "Monsieur Hargreaves," Poirot said, "you possess knowledge of this unmatched by any visitor. Have you observed anyone behaving unusually in the past 24 hours? Hargreaves hesitated, his gaze flicking nervously to the common room's shadows. I thought I saw someone near Mr. Aldridge's room last night, sir. But I cannot be certain. It may have been nothing, or someone, well, perhaps it was a trick of the light." Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. "Ah, but in uncertainty lies opportunity. Every person, every shadow, every minor disturbance may hide truth, or deceit. And that is why we must observe without prejudice, without prejudice." Later in the afternoon, Poirot discovered additional anomalies that complicated the case. In the small library, he noticed a book had been moved from its original place, a novel, innocuous in appearance, yet revealing the faint imprint of a hand. Dust smudges indicated it had been handled recently, possibly used to hide or retrieve an object. Poirot's mind catalogued the evidence with precision: the missing notebook, the faint scratches, the newly disturbed book, all suggested deliberate manipulation of the environment. To further complicate matters, Inspector Faulkner arrived at the parlour mid-afternoon, seeking to confront Poirot directly. "Monsieur Poirot," Faulkner said briskly, "I find your methods unorthodox. I must insist that my investigation takes precedence. I have authority here, as you must realize." Poirot's expression remained serene, his small hand steepled. "Ah, Inspector, authority is sometimes an illusion. Observe carefully, the human mind, when faced with someone who asserts power, tends to alter its behavior. Truths are hidden, deception is revealed, yet one must discern between the two. Your methods are theatrical, non." Faulkner's brow furrowed. "Theatrical? I am merely performing my duty." "Indeed, OUI. Duty, performance, and misdirection are often intertwined," Poirot said, his voice calm yet edged with insight. "It is crucial to remember that what appears to be truth may be a distraction, and what seems a falsehood may conceal the reality we seek." Poirot then convened a meeting with all the guests in the parlour. Candlelight flickered against the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to sway with the tension in the room. "Miss Amos," he began, "we face a situation complicated by human nature itself. Each of you possesses knowledge, motives, and perhaps secrets. The arrival of Inspector Faulkner has introduced an additional variable, yes, yet we must proceed carefully. He looked each guest in the eye, reading the micro-expressions that betrayed tension and unease. Yesterday's events were not random. Someone manipulated circumstances to obscure the truth. Red herrings abound. The key is patience, observation, and careful reasoning. The guests exchanged nervous glances. Philip Donnell's leg tapped nervously, Madame Larocque's hands clutched her handkerchief, Hargreaves wrung his apron with increasing anxiety. Even Faulkner, standing in the corner, seemed slightly unsettled under Poirot's quiet but penetrating gaze. Poirot continued, "We must consider carefully the missing notebook, the altered will, the unexplained movements, the shadows observed in corridors, the objects placed or removed. All these are part of a pattern. And patterns, once discerned, reveal the mind that created them." By late evening, Poirot had begun mapping connections between the various clues. Each red herring, the mysterious key, the moved book, Faulkner's suspicious behavior, served to distract from the underlying truth. Yet Poirot's methodical analysis had already begun to see beyond the illusions. He noted inconsistencies in statements, subtle signs of anxiety, and delicate traces of hurried movements. All of it formed an intricate web, but one that could be untangled with careful reasoning. Hastings, observing Poirot in quiet admiration, asked, "Do you think the real murderer will act again?" Poirot sipped his tea slowly, the corner of his mouth lifting in a faint, thoughtful smile. "Ah, Hastings, the human mind is a curious thing. Some act out of desperation, others out of pride or fear. Yet every action leaves a trace. Red herrings are meant to confuse, but they also reveal character. The truth will emerge, patience, observation, and the little grey cells will see that it does." As the inn settled into a tense silence, with the fog curling around its walls and the wind whispering against the panes, Poirot reviewed every detail in his mind. The threads of the puzzle, of motives, opportunities, deceptive appearances, were numerous and entangled. Yet, he was confident that the time would soon come to untangle them, to separate the illusions from reality, and to reveal the identity of the murderer who had so carefully orchestrated these events. Within the quiet confines of Willow Road Inn, the shadows grew longer, and the atmosphere thickened with suspense. Red herrings and misleads abounded, but Poirot's methodical mind remained vigilant. He had discerned the hidden patterns beneath the surface, and it was only a matter of time before the puzzle revealed its final design. Chapter 7: The Trap is Set. The morning at Willow Road Inn was unusually silent, as though the mist that wrapped the surrounding fields had seeped into the building itself, stilling the air and muting every sound. Hercule Poirot, seated near the fireplace with his little notebook open, methodically reviewed all the evidence collected thus far. Every detail mattered: the missing leather-bound notebook, the subtle inconsistencies in the guests' alibis, the disturbed objects, and the faint traces left by the murderer. He allowed himself a faint smile. The pieces were beginning to align. "Hastings," Poirot murmured, stirring his tea slowly, "today we shall prepare a situation that will compel the guilty party to reveal themselves. Human nature cannot resist the prospect of control. One who acts with arrogance will often make mistakes when the trap is skillfully prepared." Hastings, whose patience was always tested by Poirot's measured approach, asked, "And how will we set this trap, Poirot?" "We cannot simply accuse someone without proof." "None, Hastings. Proof is delicate. It is in the mind, in the gestures, in the inconsistencies. One must be subtle. One must guide, without alarming, the instincts of the guilty. Observe carefully, and the truth will emerge naturally." Poirot began by gathering the guests in the parlour under a gentle pretense. "Miss Amos," he said, with his customary elegance, "I have been reviewing Mr. Aldridge's affairs and the circumstances surrounding his unfortunate death. I would like to ask each of you a few questions, as if in casual conversation, to clarify certain points. It is important that you answer truthfully, for small lies may unravel when placed under subtle pressure." Each guest responded with varying degrees of nervousness. Madame Larocque's hands twisted in her lap, her gaze flicking occasionally toward the window as if fearing a shadow outside. Philip Donnell tapped his fingers on his knee, restless, though attempting an air of casual composure. Hargreaves wrung his hands nervously, muttering faint apologies for imagined faults in his hosting. Poirot began with calm, precise questions, observing the minute details of each answer. He asked about movements in the corridor, the locations of personal items, and the interactions between guests the previous night. He allowed pauses to stretch, creating a rhythm that would unsettle the guilty without alarming the innocent. Next, Poirot prepared the most critical element of his trap, the notebook. With Hargreaves' reluctant cooperation, he placed a duplicate of the missing leather-bound notebook in a secure yet visible location in the common room. Its presence, carefully calculated, would tempt anyone seeking to hide or retrieve critical information, and Poirot knew that human curiosity, especially in someone guilty, could not resist the lure of a carefully placed object. Poirot then arranged the guests so that each could see the notebook without suspicion. "Hastings," he whispered, "observe. Watch closely how each individual reacts. The guilty person cannot resist the temptation to act, and in their action, we will see the truth revealed." For a time, the guests appeared to maintain ordinary behavior. Madame Larocque sipped tea delicately, Philip Donnell fidgeted with his sleeve, and Hargreaves moved about with perfunctory attentiveness. Even Inspector Faulkner, who lingered near the doorway, appeared absorbed in his own thoughts, unaware of the subtleties Poirot was orchestrating. Poirot then employed a subtle psychological strategy. He began speaking softly, recounting details of Mr. Aldridge's affairs, emphasizing the critical role of the notebook, and mentioning the existence of clues that could reveal the murderer. "Ah, Miss Amis," he said, "the mind is a curious thing. When confronted with the possibility of discovery, one may act hastily. The guilty heart is rarely still for long." As he spoke, Poirot's eyes were fixed upon Philip Donnell. The young man shifted uneasily, his gaze flickering toward the notebook repeatedly, betraying an interest beyond mere curiosity. Poirot noted this quietly, yet did not comment, allowing the tension to build naturally. Poirot then engaged Madame Larocque in a quiet aside, noting her subtle reaction. "Madame, tell me, have you been tempted to see beyond what is shown, to examine what might be concealed?" She recoiled slightly at the phrasing, her lips pressing into a thin line, yet she quickly recovered. "No, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "I would never intrude." Yet the faint tremor in her hand spoke volumes to the discerning detective. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, it seems they are all anxious. How will you know which one is guilty?" Poirot's small smile widened slightly. "Patience, Hastings. The guilty one cannot endure the tension indefinitely. Subtle pressure, a hint of opportunity, and the mind betrays itself. Watch how human nature responds when faced with the possibility of exposure." The critical moment arrived in the late afternoon. Poirot spoke of an additional clue, a letter supposedly recovered from Mr. Aldridge's room, and casually allowed it to be mentioned in the presence of the guests. His words were calm, measured, almost conversational, yet perfectly designed to pique her interest. Almost immediately, Philip Donnell's hand twitched toward the notebook. His eyes darted to ensure he was unobserved, and he made a subtle, calculated move to approach it. Poirot's small eyes flicked to Hastings with barely a whisper, "Observe, mon ami." Before Donnell could touch the notebook, Poirot rose and moved closer, his presence calm but commanding. "Ah, monsieur, I see your curiosity is enthusiastic," he said gently, his tone soft yet full of quiet authority. "Curiosity, yes, but sometimes curiosity betrays a guilty mind." Donnell froze, color rising to his cheeks. His attempted action, though subtle, confirmed Poirot's suspicions. The young man had both knowledge of the missing notebook and a vested interest in retrieving it. The detective's mind catalogued every nuance of the movement, the hesitation, the fleeting glance at the door, all classic signs of guilt under psychological pressure. Poirot then addressed the group. "Miss Amis, the situation is now clear. Subtle signals, the placement of objects, and the reactions of the mind under gentle pressure have revealed what words alone cannot. The guilty party, having sought to manipulate circumstances, has betrayed themselves through action rather than speech." A tense silence filled the room. Madame Larocque's hands clasped tightly, Hargreaves stared down at the floor, and even Inspector Faulkner appeared uncertain under Poirot's calm, piercing scrutiny. Poirot stepped closer to Donnell. "Monsieur Donnell, the notebook, though unseen by most, revealed more than mere words. The careful orchestration of movements, your hesitation, your glances, all these are signs of knowledge and intent. And knowledge, combined with opportunity, can only mean one thing." Philip Donnell, his composure finally breaking, sank into a chair, his hands trembling. I did not mean. I didn't know it would. I thought I could." Poirot's tone softened slightly. "Mon ami, the mind that acts with intent leaves traces, OUI. And though fear may delay the confession, the mind cannot hide forever. You were clever, but human cleverness is rarely perfect. And now, the trap is complete." The guests, silent and apprehensive, realized that the intricate psychological strategy employed by Poirot had worked. The guilty party, compelled by opportunity and subtle pressure, had revealed themselves without overt accusation. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the detective's final articulation, which he would reserve for the culmination of the investigation. Poirot returned to the hearth, steepling his fingers and glancing toward Hastings. "Ah, mon ami, patience, observation, and subtlety are the keys to unveiling the truth. The threads of deception have been drawn taut, and the guilty mind cannot resist the tension we have applied. Soon, all will be revealed." As dusk fell outside, the mist curling about the inn's walls, Poirot felt the familiar thrill of a case nearing resolution. The trap had been set, the stage prepared, and the guilty party's actions had confirmed suspicions. Only the final assembly and explanation remained, a moment where the careful analysis of every detail would untangle the entire mystery and expose the murderer with elegant precision. Chapter 8: The Masterful Solution. The Willow Road Inn lay shrouded in mist, the final vestiges of twilight fading into night. Inside, a tense quiet hung over the parlor, the candles flickering softly and casting long shadows across the walls. Hercule Poirot, small and precise in his movements, stood before the assembled guests, his little grey eyes observing each person with the same intensity he had employed throughout the investigation. Hastings, standing at the side, could feel the anticipation in the room, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and barely suppressed guilt. Poirot raised a delicate hand, commanding attention without a word, and began his summation in his calm, methodical tone. "Miss Amis," Poirot began, "we have reached the point where the truth must be revealed. For several days, we have observed, questioned, and analyzed. Each of you has behaved in ways that are telling, OUI, and yet subtle. Motive, opportunity, and human behavior, these three pillars have guided our investigation. Today, we shall see how they converge to expose the guilty party." Poirot walked slowly to the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over Madame Larocque, Philip Donnell, Hargreaves, and even the unusual Inspector Faulkner. Let us begin with the incident itself. Mr. Aldridge's death appeared sudden, yes, yet it was deliberate. No struggle occurred, no panic disrupted the scene. The act was executed with precision, designed to appear natural while concealing intent. Only someone who knew the building, the routines, and the habits of the deceased could achieve such an outcome. Hastings nodded, recalling the careful movements Poirot had observed, the faint dust smudges, the scuff marks in the hallway, the careful placement of the letter opener. Poirot's deductions had always been guided by these seemingly minor details, yet they revealed more than the eyes could immediately perceive. The first clue, Poirot continued, was the missing notebook. This book contained knowledge that was highly sensitive, financial arrangements, potential inheritance disputes, and secrets known to only a few. Its absence indicated deliberate removal, OUI. But by observing reactions to the notebook's presence, subtle movements, and glances, we can trace the mind of the guilty person. He turned toward Philip Donnell, who shifted uneasily in his seat. Monsieur Donnell, you attempted, albeit subtly, to retrieve the notebook when it was placed in the common room. Your actions were carefully measured, yet they betrayed intention. The guilty mind cannot resist the lure of control when an object of critical value appears. And you, young man, acted precisely as someone who had knowledge of its importance would act. Philip's face paled. I did it to protect myself. I wasn't going to harm anyone. Poirot's eye softened slightly. Ah, mon ami, the guilty heart often acts out of self-preservation. Yet intent is revealed in movement, hesitation, and the instinctive actions of the mind. Your interest in the notebook, the careful observation of other guests, the nervous glance toward the doorway, all these were signs, subtle yet undeniable. Poirot then turned to Hargreaves, whose nervous gaze remained fixed on the floor. You, too, played a role, though minor. Your knowledge of the inn's routines made you a convenient ally, albeit unintentional, in facilitating the access to Mr. Aldridge's room. Yet your innocence lies in lack of intent, your nervousness stemmed from the knowledge of opportunity, not design. Madame Larocque's fingers tightened around her handkerchief, and Poirot addressed her next. Madam, your previous connection to Mr. Aldridge and awareness of his affairs was genuine, yet your intentions were never harmful. The tremor in your hands, your glances toward the corridor, these were signs of anxiety, not guilt. You feared the outcome, not caused it. Poirot finally focused on the most subtle and intriguing character, Inspector Faulkner. And now, Inspector, the question of your presence arises. While you claim official authority, your arrival was convenient. Too convenient. Your method, theatrical and rehearsed, suggests that you were not sent by Scotland Yard at all, but rather placed as a distraction to test the reactions of those present. Indeed, the telegram received earlier hinted at this, warning of a stranger among us. Your role was to provoke subtle movements, to see who acted under pressure. You fulfilled it perfectly, though unknowingly serving our purpose. Faulkner's composure faltered, and he looked confused. Poirot's explanation calmed him slightly, and the inspector realized his presence had been merely a red herring in Poirot's intricate psychological strategy. Poirot's attention returned fully to Philip Donnell. Monsieur Donnell, let us examine motive. Your financial dealings with Mr. Aldridge were delicate. You had a vested interest in the potential inheritance and the alteration of the will. The temptation was significant. Your actions were deliberate, yes, but the careful construction of alibis, your polite deflection during questioning, and the minor misdirections were all part of the design. Human desire, when pressed, will often lead to error, and your errors revealed the truth. Philip broke down, his hands clutching the arms of the chair. I didn't know it would end like this. I only wanted to retrieve what belonged to me, to secure my future. I never intended to kill him. Poirot's tone was gentle, almost philosophical. Ah, mon ami, the mind justifies actions in the name of necessity. Yet necessity, when mingled with opportunity and motive, can lead to tragedy. The act, though unintended in its deadly result, was still guided by your knowledge and desire. And in that, the guilt lies. Hastings whispered, so the notebook, the alibis, the movements, it all fits together, Poirot. Poirot inclined his head. OUI, Hastings. Each subtle clue, each gesture, each deviation from ordinary behavior was a thread. We traced these threads, observed the patterns, and allowed human nature to betray itself. The trap set yesterday was the culmination. The guilty mind cannot resist temptation, cannot withstand subtle pressure. And thus, the truth emerged. Poirot then addressed the entire room. Miss Amos, we have witnessed how human desire, opportunity, and careful planning can lead to acts that conceal themselves behind ordinary behavior. Yet no act is perfect. The smallest details, footprints, glances, hesitation, nervous movements, are all traces left behind by the mind itself. Observation, patience, and reasoning reveal them. And so, the mystery of Mr. Aldrich's death is resolved. A heavy silence filled the room. Even Hargreaves and Madame Larocque seemed to relax slightly, understanding that Poirot's methodical approach had uncovered the truth without undue accusation or rash judgment. Philip Donnell, now subdued, whispered, I understand. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for seeing what no one else could. Poirot's small smile returned. Ah, Hastings, the little grey cells are never idle. They perceive what others overlook. And justice, though sometimes delayed, is ensured through observation, subtlety, and understanding of the human mind. Monsieur Donnell will face the consequences of his actions, yet the lesson remains: every act, no matter how carefully concealed, leaves its trace. As the evening descended fully over the misty landscape, the Willow Road Inn felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from its walls. Poirot, calm and composed, reflected on the elegant unfolding of events. Each misdirection, each red herring, and each subtle clue had been a necessary part of the intricate puzzle. And now, the threads had been untangled, the mystery resolved, and human nature, in all its complexity, had revealed itself once more to the unparalleled mind of Hercule Poirot. Hastings, standing beside him near the window, whispered, Poirot, it was magnificent. The way you pieced everything together. Poirot inclined his head slightly, eyes twinkling with satisfaction. Ah, Hastings, it is not magnificence, but method. Observation, patience, and understanding of the human heart, these are the tools of the detective. And in this, we have seen the triumph of reason over deception. Mise ouïe, justice is served. And so, as night fully claimed the countryside, the mystery of Mr. Aldrich's death at the Willow Road Inn was brought to a masterful conclusion. The guests, the staff, and even the unwitting Inspector Faulkner had been swept along by Poirot's subtle orchestration, each step revealing hidden motives, concealed actions, and the enduring brilliance of the detective who had once again brought clarity to chaos.